visible, scarce, recognizable, and fungible. Sound. Money.
I mean, I know what cryptocurrency is.
Why don't you tell me what you know about Bitcoin as a jumping off point?
Okay, sure.
Yo, check it. Hey, yo, fuck cash currently. Cutties pay me in cryptocurrency. For the crystals that I cut with the cutlery. Anonymous, don't have to meet plugs on the corner now. Press enter on the keyboard. I send your order out 100 miles an hour as we cruise down the Silk Road. Blowing OG out the whip, trying to pull hoes. I dream of empires, trying to stack guap like niggas who work on Wall Street. So I'm chasing buyers. Log in, there's plenty of users and consumers getting high and rich off of their computer. Ain't nothing new, this info wait for everybody, yo. Use it to your advantage to take over your body, yo. Magic mushrooms, I had them eating them like Mario. Blockchain heavy, got it clicking with the Molly flow. And niggas gotta know.
It was founded by a Japanese guy.
Or guys, or girls, going by the name Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008. True identity still unknown.
Talking about niggas grilling, man. We out here. Lordy. Yeah. I told my Lordy to take a look inside the dark market. Upload the Bitcoin, we going car shopping. Yeah. You wanted me to check out your music page, you not popping. Knock your ass out like Bernard Hopkins. I got a computer geek white boy to go to John Hopkins. One Bitcoin worth $8,000. Let's get it. Found the vendor off the Tor browser, bought product and flipped it. He just needed a drop addy for where they gonna ship it. It wasn't a scam, he read the forms before he made a decision. Until he ran into his man Skrilla. Yeah. Told him we can do this shit legally, no need for paraphernalia. Just keep your word, I heard here's somebody that'll kill you. I'm on a Coinbase, looking kinda familiar like I've been here before. I see the transaction on the blockchain, you gotta spin with your boy. Shoot me the address to the wallet, and I'ma send it tomorrow. Just make me want run up in all black on the horse like Zorro. It'll be best to control your temperature, Paco. Put a nigga ass in the footy nails, there won't be nobody there to help you. Coinbase layout super easy, there's no way I can fail you. Use the VPN so the boys have no way to trail you. The move at fast pace, I had to control the hash rate. The value of the Bitcoin decreased, it was a bad day. Misogynist acts use bitches' backs as an ashtray. Skate on bitches like Cascade. I'm out. My lordy got a Bitcoin ATM in his living room. All of the cash I had in my pocket, I wanted to give it to him. With the vision, I'm vicariously living through him. I told my bro it's a way that we can make money even though it's different for him. He got a new job contract, want me to rip it for him. Told me any ideas I had in my mind, go ahead, pitch it to him. My Duke's busting the room like, what are you niggas doing? Get money in that bag, give me the dark way. I told my lordy to take a look inside the dark market. Upload the Bitcoin, we going car shopping. Yeah, you wanted me to check out your music page, you not popping. Knock your ass out like Bernard Hopkins. I got a computer geek white boy to go to John Hopkins. One Bitcoin worth $8,000. Let's get it. Found the vendor off the Tor browser, bought product and flipped it. He just needed a drop addy for where they gonna ship it. It wasn't a scam, he read the forms before he made a decision. Until he ran into his man Skrilla. With the raps and the Bitcoin, we can make 11 million. Get a dose of me, that's how the medicine heal you. Hear me? Give me though. Give my Bob Lordy. My Bob Lordy.
Not in generations has Wall Street absorbed the number of body blows it took today.
The world has gone mad and the system is broken.
The American financial system is rocked to its foundation as top Wall Street institutions topple under a mountain of debt.
Bailed out by the taxpayers.
It's pretty clear they cannot be trusted.
He said, your problem is that you're trying to understand this as an economic story. Once you look at it as a crime story, you'll get it.
The Fed is losing control once again. In just a couple of days, the U.S. pumped out $125 billion.
My fellow Americans, just like many of you, my family and I are social distancing. And it's important that everyone take this seriously so that we can beat this thing. And Joe, if you're watching this, 6 foot distance from everyone, buddy. Actually, that's probably a good rule for you to follow at all times. But anyway, Michelle and I are doing fine. But we did just run out of good shows to watch on Netflix. I gotta tell you though, I just started reading up on this whole Bitcoin thing, and boy oh boy, I think I'm falling down the, what do you Bitcoiners call it? Falling down the rabbit hole. As Michelle and I waited 3 hours just to get inside Costco, we ran into this gentleman who did a hell of a job pitching Bitcoin to us. Jameson Lopp was his name, a real stand-up guy. And he has a great website full of resources. I'm learning so much. I just listened to the Audible of the Bitcoin Standard from Safety and the Moose, and I just started Jan Pritzker's book, Inventing Bitcoin. Michelle, if you're ordering more supplies, you better be checking on deals on Lolly and Fold. We need to be stacking sats. Yes, whenever we can, damn it. Stacking sats, right? Am I saying that right? Sup, freaks. Anyway, folks, I just thought I'd share with you what I'm learning. But basically, in the words of the great Murray Rothbard, what has the government done to our money? The more I learn about how we've screwed up the money, the more obvious it is to me that Bitcoin fixes this. There are just so many misconceptions about Bitcoin. But America, I've decided it's time I help clear up those misconceptions. For example, I used to think Bitcoin wasted all this energy. But today, I heard this real all-American guy from Philly. His name's Marty Bent. He's got this podcast, and I heard him explain perfectly and rationally how Bitcoin is actually good for the environment. Heck, it's the real new Green Deal. I don't know about you, America, but I'm a believer in this Bitcoin thing. Might be a good idea for me to get some in case this thing catches on. Well, folks, my fellow citizens, I'm going to continue doing my own research, but stay safe and stay tuned. Michelle, did my VR headset arrive? I need it for Udi's VR Bitcoin meetup. What? Normally I can't borrow it. This Bitcoin thing's important. How many times I gotta tell you?
There are many places to buy Bitcoin. They collect your personal information and jeopardize your privacy. KYC is the illicit activity. BISC is open source. It does not collect user data. You keep your private keys, create or take offers to trade peer-to-peer, and keep your Bitcoin private and secure.
All right, guys, we're live. And slightly cut off.
What? We're cut off already? I haven't even started drinking.
Just kidding. All right. Well, I mean, we probably got like a couple hundred people watching already. Why don't we do introductions? We can start with Christy. She's on the right of me. Christy, how's it going?
Going good, man. Going good.
Why don't you tell people who you are, why they should care about what you're going to tell them on this stream?
Obviously, because I have purple hair. Color means authority, right? I'm Ogata Girl. Mostly just a mining consultant nowadays, doing stuff over in traditional technology now. But yeah, have a handful of clients that currently request Ogata Company's services for consultancy, and I guess I just keep up to date with what's happening in the industry. Not
Awesome.
A very exciting intro, but there it is.
Yeah, and I guess just a quick heads up: the whole point of this panel is to analyze 2 weeks after the halving what we've seen, the fireworks, the non-events, everything. We want to talk about it all. So we have quite a few folks from the mining industry, as well as just people that know a lot about Bitcoin. Next is someone who is in the mining industry, is Scott Offord. Scott, welcome to the show, and why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, yeah, I'm Scott Offord. My Twitter handle and Telegram is Offord Scott. So I'm an ASIC mining broker, mining machine broker, and so I just mostly help people to either buy their mining equipment or sell their mining equipment if it's used, new, doesn't matter. So yeah, I help people get their farms up and running, whether they need PDUs or power, whatever it is. So that's what I'm involved in. So I've got my finger on the pulse of the price of machines, and it's something I'm looking at every day.
Awesome. Next, let's go to Edward. Edward, you're with Slush Pool, is that correct? I got that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Edward,
that's correct.
Why don't you introduce yourself, sir?
Yeah, I'm Edward Evenson. I'm with Slush Pool. It's the first mining pool to mine on the Stratum V1 protocol that all the other mining pools have adopted and use now. We focus heavily on Bitcoin mining. The only other coin we support is Zcash, and another company that's relevant because it's the owner and operator is Brains, and we make open source software mining protocol firmware for ASIC miners.
Cool.
Sweet.
All right, next is Robert. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thanks, CK. Glad to be here. My name is Robert Breedlove. I run Parallax Digital, multi-strategy crypto fund, and Bitcoin consulting practice. Mostly trying to look at where mining is going. I think a lot of hash rate is going to come to North America, so we want to figure out how to be a part of that.
Hash rate.
Amazing. Yeah, cheers to that.
Cheers.
All right, next is Ethan.
I'm drinking water so I can do this all day.
Oh man, he's just gonna mess with us. Ethan, welcome back to the show. How's it going, buddy?
Thanks. It's good to be here post Halving. My name's Ethan. I run another mining pool. Started almost a decade later than Slush. We founded it in 2017, so we're still pretty new to the scene. We do a multitude of coins, Bitcoin, but also 10 other altcoins now, and based out of Seattle. So yeah, happy to be here and talk mining.
Cool. Next is someone who needs no introduction. Francis, welcome to the podcast, or welcome to the show. Why don't you tell people who you are?
Hi, I'm Francis. I run Bull Bitcoin, which is an OTC exchange in Canada, and I also run Bills. Bills is the world's first bill payment service with Bitcoin, and it's Canada's largest payment processor. That's kind of where a lot of Canadians go sell their Bitcoin. So I'm here to talk about, I guess our exchange is very close to retail users. We don't cater to traders. We cater more to the people that are, buying and holding, average individuals. And we deal with a lot of miners also, which are using our services to pay their electricity bills. So here to talk about kind of the retail market side of it.
Sweet. And last but not least, Kiara Bickers, welcome back to the show. How's it going?
Going good. Thanks for having me. It's cool to be here with everyone who's in the mining industry. I don't think I'll end up disagreeing with anyone, given that you picked the right audience for this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to definitely get a bunch of miners in here, but also, folks like yourself who, who are intimate with other parts of the Bitcoin ecosystem. So you guys, I'm CK. I'm also joined with Brandon from the Bitcoin Magazine team, and we're gonna talk about what has happened post halving. Before we get into that, we have some rules for this show. So these are drinking rules. No one can say the word protest, the word hash rate, or the word drink. If you say those things, then you must drink. So I'll drink to that.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah, we're going to have a fun show here. Why don't we get into, before we get into the first segment, are there kind of initial thoughts about what has happened post halving? Do people feel like everything has gone as expected? Are things kind of wonky? Why don't we start with Francis?
Yeah, well, I mean, from a market point of view, I was looking at the statistics like before and after the halving, and just nothing happened. There's definitely been like a shift in the trend since, I would say, probably like the March 12th market crash, but slightly a few months before. I guess we're going to talk about whether or not we're bullish or bearish, but halving hasn't changed anything in terms of the market. We did get like a very large fee spike after the halving, which was very the halving. I mean, I run like a Bitcoin payment processor and exchange, and we do a lot of transactions for CoinJoin, and we're not very efficient in transacting. So I got like a first-hand look at spending, 5 figures worth US dollars worth of fees in like a month. It was pretty nuts. The mempool at some point was like 100 blocks full backwards. So that's been interesting because obviously it definitely helped compensate for the loss in the subsidy. So that's kind of like what I've been seeing. I think the main event was the fee spike, and from the exchange point of view, I think we're all working on batching and all working on optimizing that.
Awesome. Let's go to Christy, and then if anyone else wants to answer this, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, so surprisingly, the halving wasn't the apocalyptic event the media made it out to be. Surprise, surprise. Most of the mining farms have just been planning for this, 3 to 4 months in advance. We saw the increase in fees. That has started to make miners start thinking more about, Bitcoin's reward model and figuring out, okay, are there ways where we can sell our hash rate to certain application providers to replace some of our lost mining revenue? And yes, lots of drinking.
Hash rate.
God damn, that is a horrible rule. And yeah, most of the farms, they understand that a drop in subsidy rewards doesn't necessarily mean their overall gain per month is going to drop. So folks are just adjusting accordingly. The people that are in mining today, I will say most of them are old hats, meaning this is probably their second or third halving. So we haven't seen too many new generation players. They might have come under a different company name, and they might have, started up a new operation under a new branch. But most of them have been around the ring with the halving. They're comfortable with it. What's interesting is that this halving coincided with the China rainy season, like almost month on month. 2016 halving was a month after, it was in July. So we've had this, not only have we had a drop in net hash due to the older generation machines being shut offline, but also because miners are starting to package up their equipment and ship it over into Southwest China to take advantage of the rainy season. So many people are, convoluting those two subjects and saying, oh my God, the halving has made Bitcoin completely, Bitcoin, Bitcoin network strength, crash. But in reality, it's just because people are getting prepared to pack up their miners, ship it over, take advantage of the rainy season while it's profitable. And I think we're going to see not only the missing, 25 terahash come back, but I think we'll see a lot more of that. It's more profitable to take your old S9s or T2Ts, throw them in China, than it is to recycle them at this point.
So old hash coming back onto the network. Interesting take. Anyone else have an opposing thought there, or anything to add?
I'd add that something that people are underestimating right now is like China's, I guess, appetite for custom firmware, and we can probably get Ed to weigh in here. But to my understanding, historically, Chinese miners have been somewhat skeptical of firmware, versus now it's starting to penetrate in a big way. So with firmware like Brains OS or other firmwares, you can start getting some extra juice out of those machines. So you can take an S17 Plus to like 90 terahash plus potentially. So that could be an extra like 10, 15 exahash that's just added to the network through, firmware penetration. But I'll plug Ed here and let him talk about his firmware.
Thanks, Ethan. Yeah, I mean, just to build off the S17 plus comment, I've seen ones that are immersion cooled hit over 100 terahash. The efficiency can go down to like 32, 30 watts, which effectively turns an S17 into an M30S. So, and I think part of the aversion to earlier on by Chinese miners to firmware is because a lot of the early versions they were exposed to were just essentially glorified malware, and it was a lot of people putting things in there that like stole hash rate and things like that. Whereas there's much more of an industry standard now that there's some leading players in the space. Um, it helps that everything. Well, we have the open source version that's just clear and transparent. The one with the proprietary tuning algorithm. The only thing that isn't open source is the tuning algorithm. We obviously don't want to just hand that out, but it's matched for everything else on the open source version. So you can see basically 90% of what's inside of it if you look at the open source one. But yeah, firmware is definitely going to play a big part, I think, especially if a lot of the people predicting S17s, T17s, and M20Ss and M20S Plus having kind of being the new S9 and having, the M21S as well, being the new S9s. And for people to really squeeze that, 3 to 5 years of life out of them, I think firmware is going to be pretty crucial as more and more hardware turns on, because similar to what Christy said, I don't disagree with her at all. A lot of the old machines aren't necessarily going to disappear. We're going to see them come back in a big way. They just generally get moved to places with cheaper electricity. Not just China during the wet season, but Iran, some parts of Canada, some parts of Georgia, Azerbaijan. So you're going to see it come back in a big way, especially in the next couple of weeks, because wet season has already started. We're already seeing some of that ASIC computational power come back already. So yeah, I would say firmware is coming out in a big way. And it seems like every day when I'm on Telegram or just doing research, it seems like there's a new player in the space. Even when you weed out all the white labels, because generally it's just someone who's co-branded another firmware and they split the dev fee. But more and more people are starting to develop their own. I get emailed on like every other day asking people to partner with Slushpool and, oh, you can use our firmware for your miners and things like that, which shows they don't necessarily do their research before they reach out to the people they're reaching out to. But yeah, that's about it for me.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Edward about miners being moved around. Obviously, one of the big things with the halving is it's very much less profitable to be mining. So some of these smaller mines that haven't secured a good electricity rate have had to shut off their old miners, like the S9s. Or they've had to really tune them down to make them more efficient. So just in the last week alone, I've seen really an influx of people looking to sell, people looking to buy used miners. And especially when you kind of combine that with people's apprehension about buying things like the Bitmain S17 Plus. There's been a lot of news about that recently, with a very high incidence of issues with miners breaking. So yeah, people are looking for potentially mid-generation, not the latest and greatest models, but the halving was definitely a point in time there where people had to make that choice. They've been planning, like Christy has said, planning for a few months now. Hey, what are we going to do with our old gear? What are we going to do? Are we going to buy new gear? And unfortunately, a lot of these farms ran out of capital. They might have purchased miners last year, and they were hoping that maybe the hash rate would be a little bit lower, or that their operating costs weren't as high, and they might not have been able to save up enough money or borrow enough money to buy new miners. So it really puts them in a very interesting position right now, where a lot of farms are shutting down because they just haven't been able to upgrade their gear. So yeah, that's at least my perception of what's happening in the mining industry.
Robert or Kiara, do you guys have anything to add here?
I could just throw in a couple of thoughts, and actually maybe kind of evolve into some questions for the group as well. So I think the numbers I looked at most recently said the current miner break-even is around $30 to $40 per megawatt hour. Clearly that depends on a number of factors, but how much of that, like, what I'm trying to understand is, like, of the second generation hardware, how much of that flows to existing energy assets, say in North America or elsewhere, where there may be surplus energy production that could be monetized? Whereas I know, like, today in North America, a lot of the energy markets are regulated, so miners do not have access to those wholesale energy markets. And I'm curious as to how you guys see that unfolding. How might those kind of second, third generation assets flow to those energy assets? And then two, like, where it looks like solar is kind of the leader in efficiency. And I wonder if it's going to flow mainly to solar and wind assets, if we're going to see it go elsewhere. Just some general thoughts and questions for the group.
Just to reiterate, so I'm clear, you're asking if some of the older machines will flow towards North America, despite it having a less friendly regulatory environment for electricity consumption?
Well, more so looking at what types of energy production they would flow towards, to be solar or wind. And then two, how, like, we think that the people that are the gatekeepers of the regulated energy markets today, they're basically leaving money on the table. So for instance, one of the ones we looked at was they had a wind asset in West Texas. You know, its peak production is at midnight, or when demand is lowest. And so just by doing a real rudimentary analysis, saying if you co-located Bitcoin mining at that asset, you could increase the monetization of it, say 4 to 7%, with a miner only running 20 or 25% of the time. So yeah, just thinking about how you guys see that market unfolding.
I can jump in here. I think it's going to be a big part of North American development moving forward. I think there's this common misunderstanding that China has superior energy infrastructure. You know, it's true that Sichuan has overbuilt hydro, but I think, like, overall there is a pretty sophisticated energy grid in US and Canada. So those energy assets, I think, could benefit immensely from installing Bitcoin or crypto mining facilities in them to act as kind of the load balancer. So using it as a way to essentially export electricity globally, and then anytime, you know, that price is, you know, below what you could make from mining with it, using it, I think we'll start to see more and more companies doing it. Layer 1's probably the most vocal about it, and obviously has got a lot of attention from SFVCs. So if they're successful and you know, they can build a good operation, I think we'll start to see a lot more money pour into those types of operations.
I've got a question for other people in the group. I think from my limited experience with mining, one of the most expensive costs tends to be the regulatory burden. Is there like mining moving to the US? Have you seen that there's less regulatory burden than, say, in other places?
Yeah, if you are, so speaking from my time at Core Scientific, if you make sure to take advantage of some of the state benefits you can get, and you introduce yourself to the state as soon as possible, and you start explaining, hey, you know, this might be a Bitcoin facility, but here's all the jobs we're going to create. Here's
like,
the
we're going to start using an obscene amount of power.
Yes, and most of them are actually okay with that. Honestly, yeah. Most of them are okay. So not every state. So you take Washington, for example, here, and you see the utility guys like PSE actually sitting at Olympia, like lobbying against Bitcoin mining. But that they're very grouchy about that. You go to places like North Carolina, you go to places like Georgia, Dalton, and you start to a little bit to the state. And they're actually excited because you are consuming a ton of energy, yes, that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to sell. And so it gives them much more, capacity and much more sales volume. They're excited about that. And you can come to an understanding where you say, okay, in periods of high demand, we'll be able to scale down our miners, which is the same thing Layer 1 is doing. And as long as you know how to, work that sort of a business, yes, that's valuable. That, however, isn't unique to the US. That's something you can go ahead and do, anywhere in the world. It's just literally, it's just lobbying in a sense. And so you do have quite a few large mining operations in places like Australia, in places like Sweden, in places, there's one in Germany actually, that also do similar things like this. The biggest issue is still in the US, a lot of the taxation. While Bitmain has managed to start most of their production in Malaysia, bypassing that, it is still an issue on some other components. And so that has been, one of the big drawbacks. There's been mining farms that have tried to lobby to get exclusions to the tariffs, specifically for cryptocurrency. Some have been successful in certain states, but it's kind of tricky to maneuver. But yeah, 9 times out of 10, the regulators, they publicly have to say, hey, Bitcoin, not cool. But behind the scenes, they're actually okay with it. As long as you are paying your taxes, you're being a good steward of the state, you're creating these jobs, and you're not doing anything illegal, and it's all above board. They're like, well, hell. The traditional AI and tech stack companies are not going to consume this amount of electricity.
Sure.
And the thing they're most worried about, I'll just end with, is they're worried about security. So that might not be the right way to word it, but they're very worried. A lot of them are scarred from the 2017 and 2018 boom, where you had a bunch of newcomers jumping in, throwing around these crazy amounts of money, and then when the crypto winter hit, boom, they disappeared. So regulators are much more educated now, and they're a little concerned with who they back, and they want to ensure that the mining farm that they're making their projections on isn't going to disappear in a crypto winter. They have a fully fleshed out business model, so they do more thorough due diligence, I would say, on your financials, and they do a lot more due diligence on that part. But I mean, in 2020, it seems like a lot of these quick money grab operations have sort of died down, and it's just the industrial players that are left.
So
People
I want
who actually run profitable farms.
So I want to jump back. I want to jump in here. We have our last participant who just joined, David Puel. Thanks for coming on. Just some quick housekeeping, David. So we have drinking rules. You can't say the word protest. You can't say the word hash rate. You can't say the word drink. So if you say those things, you gotta drink. We just asked the question: were there any surprises for the since the halving? Most of the conversation so far has been more along the lines of on the mining side. I think you have a pretty unique perspective just because you do so much on-chain analysis. Did you see anything that surprised you from the halving, or was everything kind of just as expected?
Hey all, thanks for the invite and pleased to meet you all. Surprising. I guess the most surprising thing is that nothing major happened. We always see a dump in the market after that. This is from a more like a trader's perspective, but I don't know, on-chain analytics has been very much sideways in signal or trading trends since basically almost a year. I think you saw some buying signals or some very bullish signals coming from a few indicators. Most people know in the industry by now, like the MBRV ratio and all that stuff. But for the most part, it was very atypical in this part of the cycle, in my perspective, despite the halving and with coronavirus events happening all over. So I think I consider since the top of 2018, I consider a very sideways market in a huge range, of course, between pretty much 4K or so and 10K. Um, I think it has been a struggle between two components, especially before the coronavirus, which is very strong holders. You see that with very low amounts of coin days destroyed in historical terms, and with relatively stable hodl waves. And on the other part, also you could say a lack of demand. I think that demand has increased, especially coming from the West since coronavirus. The just the amounts of buying volume in the order books and all that has been increasing severely. Um, what we saw in 2019, the market structure was uh, a lot of it created by what happened with Plus Token, both in the pump by supply restriction and then in the dump by just the huge amount of distribution coming from Chinese exchanges. So the most surprising part by now, I think that the market is pretty much just stabilizing. So it's not as surprisingly.
Cool.
Christian,
Francis,
can
yeah,
I?
go for it.
Yeah, I doing like the cost of mining. I mean, the main cost of mining now is electricity, and I think the firmware aspect of it is kind of cool to me because it's not something I had expected to really have an effect. It's actually really interesting. I wasn't following. I didn't know that the firmware penetration is having such an effect, but definitely the cost of mining is primarily gravitating towards electricity. And as time goes by, what we're seeing is the advantage of access to hardware, which was a big factor, historically to Bitcoin. I mean, it was the main factor. Slowly went away, and now I think access to hardware is not really kind of a restriction. It's not a huge barrier to entry to anyone. And in terms of the cost, I mean, coming from Quebec, like I'm very familiar. I used to be an economics researcher actually, and like I study the cost of electricity, and hydro is relatively cheap, but hydro goes to like let's call it 3 cents US per kilowatt hour is the cost of production of Hydro Quebec, and let's just call it like SOL on average in USD terms, like 4 cents, 4.5 cents USD kilowatt hour. Wind, possibly much cheaper in some windy places of Europe, but wind again in Canada, it's like around, let's say, 12 cents kilowatt hour to produce USD. And gas, however, natural gas has basically a very low price. I mean, and it can actually go far lower than zero. So the thing with natural gas in Alberta is that if you own the land, you have a lot of liabilities associated to gas. Some of it is the deposit you have to pay to the oil and gas fund. In case your well goes bankrupt, then people have to clean it up. It's like an insurance fund you have to pay, and then you have to pay to get on the grid. So when you're mining, when you're exploiting gas, like the grid is not free. You have to pay to get your gas on the grid, so it's sold. And oftentimes, if you're drilling for oil, well, basically, if you're drilling oil, the soil is going to go down as you're pumping out the oil, and it's going to push out, and the gas is just going to go out. You can't stop it. You're not pumping for the gas; it's just coming out. And there's methane restrictions, so that's where like the regulations kind of aspect comes in. Actually, those regulations make Bitcoin mining like cheaper in Alberta because since there's the cap on methane that you can emit in the air, the natural gas well owners need to capture it, and they need to split it, and they need to sell it. If they don't sell it, they need to flare it. They can't just let it go into the atmosphere. And that's where it's really interesting because that's where the cost of natural gas goes below zero, because it just has to come out, and it's just this huge liability. And then if you add the liabilities of all the stuff, you're willing to pay people to come to your property and take the gas away. And the the mobile mine thing for the gas wells that people have been seeing. I mean, a huge figure of that is Steve Barber, Upstream Data, like awesome entrepreneur. Really huge fan of this guy. And I've been to Alberta. I've been on gas wells that are not Steve's. Like I mean, it's a real thing. It's not just a meme. It's 100% real. It's all over the place. You have like trailers with their own miners, and it's like the most rugged setup you've ever seen in your life. You don't need bandwidth for mining. I mean, it's just pure electricity, and then they get, they're saving a few cents. I mean, their cost to mine is kilowatt hour. So I'm super bullish on natural gas mining. I'm unbelievably bullish because there's such an insane amount of natural gas in the world that's still left to be exploited, and the collapse in gas price, like, there's no reason why these nations need to stick together and maintain this cartel anymore. I think it's kind of like a free for all. The price of gas is gonna stay very low, and I think as the price of gas stays low, and we are going through an economic collapse. I mean, there's no luxury. Green energy is kind of a luxury. I think people are going to go back to gas a lot, and I'm super bullish on gas mining, and that's why I'm super bullish on Alberta, but also the United States. And there's always subsidies that come from it's always been electricity driven. Ultimately, the hardware in China was a huge thing, but everybody knows about these subsidized like coal plants in Mongolia and the subsidized hydro dams. And
maybe you're the person I should have directed the regulatory question to, because when I was asking that question, actually what I was thinking about was Quebec, because electricity and things may be cheaper there because it's subsidized, but then they also require that you hire 100 French-speaking workers to do nothing.
Yeah, it's quotas, right? It's basically
exactly. You can make them all models, which is fun, but like it's a very weird environment where you have to it's not supply and demand. It's how much will the government allow me to pay for this particular thing.
And Quebec is a tragedy because we were very competitive, but now it's just all gone. And you're right. I mean, what they did is the regulations increased the cost of electricity tremendously because they put this quota on miners, say only this amount is allowed to mine, and it's insane electricity surplus in history. But yeah, it's just a matter of exploiting these kind of arbitrage opportunities, and places like Alberta or the North US that's got natural gas that's taking advantage of it. I mean, they're definitely the future of mining as far as I can tell.
You guys, I want to move on to the next segment, but this has been an awesome start to the show. This next segment is bullish or bearish, and we want to get some hot takes. We want you guys to argue over different opinions here. First and foremost is Twitter. So this doesn't necessarily have to do anything to do with the halving, but it seems as though Twitter has kind of just been a hot topic recently. I know Bitcoiners are on Twitter all the time. Does anyone have any hot takes on Twitter?
Could you be more specific?
I mean, the president's tweeting about Twitter. All social media seems to be doing a lot of filtering. If you wanna be nice to them, you could also call it censoring. I don't know. Like, are we seeing the demise of centralized social media? Like, any opinions?
I guess it depends on what your perception of these platforms are. Like, if you just see them as a private corporation with the ability and the right to allow whatever they want on their platform, then there's not a problem. But if you see it as some sort of public good or public forum, then you would take the opposite stance. I think it's just a matter of philosophical alignment in this case. Seems pretty cut and dry to me.
I think in real life, though, it can't be like that black and white. Like libertarian view, obviously you want the company to be able to determine what's on their platform or not, but like, is it a public good, and is it a platform that can't be replaced? So like electricity companies have taken monopolies over cities. We wouldn't want them like cutting off electricity to your house because they found out which way you voted. So like
aren't there
Twitter,
like a new
like has
platform though where they're doing like anything goes, and then another one where it's
there's
more
always been
regulated?
platforms like that, but like Twitter has become like a monopoly on free speech, or at least a platform for it. So it's kind of, for me, it feels like an electricity company cutting off the power to your house based on which way you voted. Is Twitter determining what you can and cannot say on their platform? So even if you want that like libertarian view that private companies can do what they want, I feel like it's a lot more gray than that now.
I mean, if you're not someone who's moving the Overton window, it doesn't really matter to you, like you're just tweeting memes and whatnot. But if you're posting anything edgy, it's very difficult to do that on Twitter, which just sort of like makes it less interesting. The unfortunate thing is that there isn't really an alternative. Like whenever someone tries to create an alternative to an existing social media site, they make it exactly like the existing social media site, except like with this free speech branding and like no moderation. And it turns out no moderation is really shit too. So it's like, I don't know if you've ever participated in a forum where anyone can just say whatever they want. It's garbage, right? It's like a dumpster fire. So I don't enjoy the moderation that Twitter's doing, because I think it's definitely overstepping the lines where things can't be fun and edgy anymore. But it just makes it so people don't even really say anything other than what everyone already agrees with.
Yeah, anyone who was a gamer at any point in their life knows that if there's no rules, it turns into a shit show pretty quickly. So.
Right.
To prod even further, I would wonder, the pretense of a lot of this is the fact that Twitter recently fact-checked President Trump.
Yes.
I wonder what would Twitter do in a fact-checking manner around Bitcoin. What are Twitter's facts around Bitcoin? I mean, who
luckily
knows?
Dorsey is like pro
Yeah.
Bitcoin, right? So
I don't think we have too much to worry about in that arena, seeing how
Well,
this
do you think
goes.
Dorsey is the one that's helping guide Twitter's policy around this? I'm not sure if he is.
Jack's
He
on his
said
way out
something
too.
saying he was taking full. It's his responsibility ultimately what happens.
He just tweeted about that. He just said, "I'm the one who makes the final call."
Yeah, he basically said the buck stops here. So
he's gonna be gone in a year though. Like Elliott Management, they're so good at forcing out like executives. They just got Silver Lake a board seat. It's just a matter of time before Jack's out. I'd put it like 12 months.
So
He's
is that
gone.
the end of Twitter? Jack announced the end of Twitter?
It depends if that like Elliott Management guy Cohen comes in. I don't really know who would replace him. Hopefully somebody who's pro Bitcoin.
I mean, we've heard like essentially he's more or less lost control already from what I've heard. And then I think, fact checking is just pretty speak for censorship.
Sure.
And I don't see that the government getting involved is going to make things any better necessarily. They're just going to try to be the ones holding the reins. So I think this is something to really keep a close eye on. Another thing I saw recently was Google was actually going into Google Drive apparently and deleting links to whatever was deemed to be misinformation, and these were related to documentaries pertaining to the coronavirus. But they were deleting files from people, apparently deleting links from people's private Google Drive. So I just, from the libertarian standpoint, you have to keep a keen eye on anywhere you see violations of freedom of speech, because that's the first chink in the armor that slides towards tyranny. So I think we really have to be vigilant about this.
that brings it back to the original point, though. Like, is it a violation of freedom of speech if it's on a privately owned platform?
Well, the thing is, private property there's no private property anymore. I mean, that's kind of dead. Like, everybody that, except Bitcoin, right?
Bitcoin.
But everybody that's now saying that, it's funny how you get all these libertarians coming out, about it's Twitter's property rights to publish whatever they want, but I'm still taxed, and like, my money's not my property, and this is people advocating for taxation or that aren't, revolting against taxation or saying it's Twitter's property. And I was a huge libertarian. I'm not a libertarian anymore since coronavirus. I'm like, it doesn't even matter. The ideology doesn't matter anymore. Like they're fucking coming after me. They're fucking trying to keep me inside. I get tickets. Like, this is war, right? And it doesn't matter. The means justify the ends now. And I think Trump going after Twitter is a good thing. I think the Twitter's rules are, it might be Twitter's property, and maybe ethically, from a libertarian standpoint, it's okay to do whatever they want. But I don't want that. I don't want them to have the right to do what they want. Like, I don't have the right to do what I want. Nobody has the right to do what I want, and I don't have the right to do what I want, because you got Twitter censoring conservative voices and censoring anti-hysteric voices, against the COVID lockdowns. And the way that I see it, like, I don't know. I don't care about, what's right and wrong anymore. I just care about, like, what's going to prevent the liberals from taking over my life and just taking everything I have.
Amen.
I think it's just a natural progression of how things go. Whenever like a new edgy iconoclastic trend comes from, like 10, 15 years ago when social media was a proponent of free speech and all that, and then it turns against it pretty much diametrically. I think that happens in history continuously. It's just a constant of nature, and even more so human nature. That's one front. You could also make the libertarian or even anarcho-capitalist claim. David Friedman's Machinery and Freedom. He has the take on private security firms, but you can extend it to information firms, such as the social media guys, the robber barons right now. I think you can make the claim that some private entity becomes so powerful that it actually becomes a government in a way, or at least a handler of a very powerful part of society, such as information and users' privacy, that it actually becomes a problem from a libertarian standpoint. I just think it's a natural progression. I lean towards being in favor of Trump because I see it more as a power move. I think what he does is power moves, very businesslike. I'm unsure of the precedents is gonna have, but for the most part, I just think it's power fighting power, and with some ideology in it, and we're just stuck in the middle. I don't think we can do much about it either way, like Francis pointed out.
It seems to me to be another area where we need to put the control over the rules beyond the control of man, almost. Like, Bitcoin is this immutable monetary rule set that no one can really change. I said, like, Bitcoin's changing the world by being unchangeable. Like, that's kind of its core value prop. And there needs to be, money is just financial media, but we need that for all forms of media, essentially. So I don't know. Maybe like technologies like Eurobit or other self-sovereign data platforms become increasingly important down the line. But these types of debates, like I do lean libertarian, but I think we need technologies that are just unmanipulable and uncensorable.
It seems like a lot of the social media platforms have rules and then they enforce them asymmetrically. It's like if they agree with you, then they don't enforce the rules. And if they don't agree with you, then they do enforce the rules. Maybe that's kind of what you mean by how we need some sort of like actual rules that are enforced and are clear. Because I have no problem with moderation. Like I think moderation is a positive thing, but it's just never actually enforced in a way that makes any fucking sense.
Exactly. When the rules are changeable, they become politicized, inevitably.
I mean, is it even possible to enforce these rules in an effective way when you have billions of people on a platform? Like, is that even
that is the argument they would definitely
possible?
make? But the problem is, like, think about the type of person who goes into HR or the type of person who goes into like content enforcement, right? Like they all have a particular bias. And like there's nothing, I have nothing against them as an individual, but it's like they're drawn to this industry. So it's like if you have 100 people that need to moderate content, all of them are left leaning. Like that's obviously going to create a problem.
Well, I mean, these are like 2,500-year-old arguments, right? Like even the ancient Greeks thought that once a city-state got to a certain size, it should split off and become another city-state because democracy would no longer be effective at that point. Like
it's a slightly different, the power versus, content moderation. Like it's a different person who wants to become the president and who wants to moderate content on Twitter, but I think the problem is the same. Like I would never want that job, right? And it's a miserable soul who wants to sit around and like watch people yell at other people on the internet and then like ban them.
So this is getting pretty political, and I'm not sure why I thought I wouldn't, but let's change the subject. Next is
I have no strong opinion on it, for the record. I just think it's...
Next is GBTC. GBTC is reported to be sucking up more Bitcoin than are being mined on a daily basis or a weekly basis. I'm not sure how they break that out. Bullish or bearish on GBTC in particular? Let's start off with with Ethan.
I'm bullish for like boomers. I mean, they've proved that UX is like valuable. I think the premium's like 8% on it right now over Bitcoin. Plus, there's that 2% fee. So, obviously, the ability to buy that Bitcoin trust in your 401k, ease of use, like you don't have to learn a new technology. That's valuable for older people. So, I think we'll continue to see money come into that trust as old people invest in Bitcoin. But long term, like kids are born, on the internet now, and they're digitally native. So I don't see why you pay a premium on Bitcoin and that fee to acquire it. Plus, you probably want you're more comfortable with your like less custodianship. So I think in the short term it'll continue to accelerate, but long term, I think people will go to better platforms to buy Bitcoin or get exposure to it.
Anyone bearish on GBTC?
I kind of share those sentiments that short term it is going to continue to be a big deal because of its accessibility privileges, basically to these capital pools that otherwise don't know how or won't touch Bitcoin. It also introduces an interesting game theoretic aspect because people try to game that premium. The premium tends to expand a lot in bull runs, and I know some high net worths that are holding GBTC planning to dump it at a premium in a bull market type of thing. So it's interesting, but I'm bearish long term. I agree that other technologies are going to eat that margin's lunch. It just doesn't make any sense to run that through a trust at that high of a fee.
Yeah, I'd say I'm bullish on at least on Grayscale. I think they're doing a lot of great things. I don't really know much about GBTC, but I think Digital Currency Group and all them are doing some pretty interesting things.
Is having like a trust sucking up so much Bitcoin, is that bullish or bearish? Like, does it get to a point where it's just so much Bitcoin is being centralized by this trust that it becomes a negative?
I think a negative aspect of it is that, so much Bitcoin that various people own is being put into custodianship, because that kind of defeats the purpose in a large way. I think that's one negative. Another negative is that it makes it more exposed to potential like security breaches or hacks, basically someone getting the private keys. I guess the last big negative I see is something like Plus Token or Satoshi's coins, where they could amass so many coins that any move they make in the market could have consequences, kind of like a ripple effect to the price. But other than that, I'd say it's just a firm collecting Bitcoin at a premium for people.
I don't think it's a bad thing. Like it could be a gateway drug for people investing in it to eventually buy like Bitcoin directly and actually hold their keys. So ideally, they get they test it out in their 401k, and then they like it and they learn more about the technology because they're holding it. Usually, if you hold an asset, you start like really caring about it. So hopefully, it just leads to more adoption, and then adoption into actually holding your keys.
I personally think it's bullish on the price domain, but bearish on the Bitcoin revolutionary domain, you could call it. I think it's it's a great indicator of one of the trends that worry me most regarding Bitcoin, which is as Edward mentioned, centralization in exchanges and custodians. I think it defeats the purpose, but one possibility down the road is that Bitcoin becomes very much like any other financial asset, and it's just with very high Gini coefficients and with you know a Pareto distribution of ownership that pretty much centralizes the whole thing into the smart, early, and wealthy, already wealthy. Um, that thing worries me, especially if full-blown bad actors capture a lot of liquidity. Plus token is the great example of that, more than Grayscale or any other. I think for instance, to give you a very definite example, I think the CCP is probably, if not the largest hedge fund, Bitcoin hedge fund in the world right now. That I think is one of the trends that worry me the most. Through custodianship, trading games, it's no longer about mining. It's just about liquidity now. So through that vehicle, smart and liquid actors capturing Bitcoin supply is one of my main worries, and I think it's one of the indicators of that.
You think the Chinese government is one of the biggest holders of Bitcoin?
But
Either directly or indirectly, yeah. I think this
Indirectly
token,
meaning any company operating under their
I
jurisdiction.
assume, I assume they're very much nationalized, either on paper or not. And besides that, they just have such a huge amount of manpower. Where, let's say, Plus token, right? So Plus token was most likely a Ponzi scheme created probably privately or half and half, but there's no way you cannot distribute that much Bitcoin and KYC exchanges in China without the Communist Party permission, right? So I think they may not be the planners of the whole thing, but they are certainly exploiting the game theory of the process of anti-fragilization of Bitcoin throughout time to capture a lot of the liquidity overall. And it's a very cheap hedge for them. They hate the dollar. They hate the allied countries' currencies. So it's just makes sense for them to just accumulate as much as possible. It's just a very cheap hedge given their liquidity and their manpower.
I would push back against that a little bit. Sorry, go on.
But it's not a bad thing for Bitcoin, right? Because we already saw these. I mean, they tried to split it and they tried to essentially wreck it, take control of it with at least 80%, maybe more, the hash rate behind them. I mean, the amount of Bitcoin holders, like large whale Bitcoin holders, that were also attacking Bitcoin in 2017 with the Sigma 2x thing. The fact that the Chinese government definitely, North Korea also might own a lot of Bitcoin. I mean, I don't think it doesn't have any externality on me and you, right? So I own a non-custodial exchange. I mean, I think custody is the devil, but I just think it's kind of a lifestyle choice. If there's a lot of Bitcoins concentrated on GBTC, for example, I have a lot of faith in them being able to use that to attack Bitcoin successfully. I mean, they've already tried and they've already failed. And if it makes Bitcoin more valuable, it also makes Bitcoin more secure because the security of Bitcoin is a direct result of the price. I mean, number goes up equals it's harder to attack Bitcoin from a rate of hashing point of view. It's a shame that these people are not using their own custody. But I mean, my own parents and people in my family, they've been around me for 5 years, and I'm kind of a Bitcoin, expert. I'm very good at helping people integrate Bitcoin. And even recently, I've had, family members had catastrophic problems with their keys and stuff like that. I thought that the boomers around me knew about how to handle the keys and stuff, but they didn't at all, and they don't care about the censorship resistance aspect of it. They don't care about the privacy aspect of it. They love paying taxes self custody is not for them. Bitcoin's not for them. as an end user product and payments technology, for sure it's not for them. And what's good for them is number goes up, the price of Bitcoin goes up over time. That's what they want Bitcoin for, and it's a shame that they're not holding it, but it doesn't hurt the network things. I mean, in Canada there's the through IQ Bitcoin fund that launched on the TSX, and that's a real thing. I mean, I'm involved with that. That's a real project, and best case scenario is to just remove those Bitcoins from circulation and leave them there for a really long time. And if they get stolen and dumped, well, it's happened before. I mean, there's been much larger hacks than GBTC and 3IQ and all those things. So.
Well, yeah. For the record, I would put it as it's bullish price and security wise. It's bearish Gini coefficient wise. That's all.
Good distinction.
It's just, I guess, you either care or you don't care about the Gini coefficient.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. I actually don't care about it. I think it's just gonna happen when it happened, and some people are just gonna get the most coins, and that's it.
I had sorry, real quick, sort of on this note, a little bit of a debate earlier with an economist named Richard Werner, who was putting forth the hypothesis that Bitcoin was created by the CIA. And I don't know, I just think it's interesting, like, it almost doesn't matter who made it or who accumulates it most quickly. The Gini coefficient clearly has impacted how quickly it happens and who does it, but in the long run, it still seems to be a net benefit for humanity, right? Just to defund the state and all the problems it's created. But I think in that sphere, clearly autocratic countries are going to move a lot more quickly. So I agree. China and North Korea are probably already are ahead of the curve on that race, and that just doesn't bode well for more democratic countries.
So I'm bullish on democratic countries because I think that centralized decision making fucks up eventually. Like, they just cannot consistently make the right decision because they just don't have the information to beat the market. And I think that more decentralized, more capitalistic countries will eventually will continue to keep winning because they allow the market to influence their decisions more.
CK, I agree with that, but here's the old saying, the way I like to think about it, is if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Socialist countries can move a lot more quickly. They can mobilize people a lot more quickly with kind of one singular plan. And given that Bitcoin is, a really abrupt race to the finish line, right? Just accumulate as much coin as possible. I think, unfortunately, autocratic countries are going to outpace us. But I completely agree. Free markets outcompete centrally planned markets in the long run for the reasons you just laid out. Everyone has their own plans, and you have to assimilate that into a cohesive whole, which is why socialism tears itself apart. But in this particular race, they could have a leg up.
Also, tyrannies in general eat themselves from within, right? As opposed to democracies for the most part.
It's getting dark over there by Francis. I can't see what he's drinking.
All right.
Do you guys think, though, that as countries get more wealthy, that the chances of them becoming democratic and free market, grow stronger? Like, do you think that putting sanctions on North Korea has, put them back in terms of the path forward to democracy?
Say that question again. I missed it. I was too busy holding on my beer.
This is drinks in quarantine, right? Oh, I said drink.
I want that strawberry drink, whatever that is.
Do you think that, like, the wealthier a country is, the easier path it has to being democratic and free market?
I might even argue the opposite.
Yeah.
right?
Back there.
It's like, well, it depends on how centralized the wealth is, I guess. And wealth tends to be a self-centralizing thing, especially in inflationary economies. So I would almost argue that as a country gets more wealthy, it inherently becomes kind of more authoritarian and more centralized, which is, part of the reason why we're all in this, right? I mean, it's about creating something that goes against that grain.
Do you think, like, say the CCP, do you think they look at Bitcoin as a fait accompli, like a foregone conclusion, as much as we do, or are they still just hedging in their acquisition of it? What do you guys think about that?
It's on
Hedging,
their
they're too
radar. I don't
stupid.
think they really care that much, to be honest. Like,
But I think it's a very pragmatic, cheap hedge for them.
I think
I
there's
don't-
like a 1 or 2% chance that once they launch their central bank currency, they try and crush Bitcoin. It's probably low, but it's a concern I bring up often is that so much hash rate is so centralized in China that on that off chance, that 1-2% chance that they want to push for their central bank currency and they want to control every single dollar transaction in their economy, that they go and attack the network. And
I'd agree with that.
What does that look like? Let's just say attack commence. China's putting all their power behind attacking the network.
It's not even hard. Like, people don't realize that the attack can happen on a mining pool level. So I think the idea that they have to seize hash rate, that would be really hard to do. These mining farms are secretive. They would have to actively go to these farms and take control of them. Like, China's trying to get foreign investment right now into a bunch of their sectors. So they're not going to go around with tanks and take over mining farms. But what they could do is, in Beijing, there's 3 companies that have over 51% of the network controlled by their laptops. They could bring in 3 individuals from those 3 companies and immediately have over 51% of the network and do a mining pool attack. That attack would be kind of temporary because mining participants would eventually catch on and jump pools. But for me, it would be enough to really hurt the network. The fact that I got 51%
Would they
attack.
attack the network, or would they shut it down, like shut down the hash power?
Well, shutting it down doesn't necessarily stop the network.
No, of course not. But like, I don't. From the perspective of the CCP, like, do you care? Like, the network can't be shut down, so do you just not allow it in your country anymore, or do you take all of the profits from it in sort of like in a theft sort of way?
Well, if they shut it down, they'd only turn off like 65% of the hash rate long term. So I don't think that would be enough to really destroy the network. Like, the difficulty would adjust.
Why would they
So-
shut it down when they're gaining so much revenue from it? Like, let's game theory this.
I don't
Like,
think
if-
Bitcoin mining is a big revenue generator compared to their other industries. Like, it's still
The-
only
the
$5
people
billion
that
a
are-
year.
Well, we're assuming that
Well,
their actual goal is not just profit but control. So like they would prefer a currency that they control to one they can't control.
So why wouldn't you then instead you keep it so game theory time you let's separate local. Local would probably keep supporting this. Central would just want to monitor and track the people who are not correctly, who are using this to avoid taxes. So saying, hey, I don't have any money whatsoever, unemployment benefits, etc. Slowly gather this list and start docking them on their social credit scores or other kinds of censorship tools, and then force them through their new currency that they're currently developing and prototyping out. Wouldn't that be the correct way? Because then you still get the local government benefiting from all of the energy consumption. And I will say, currently working still in the China mining farms, it does account for a huge chunk of some of the different regions margins like that. They like that.
No, I think you're right. I think the Chinese government enjoys profit. I don't think they're going to stop profiting just to have more control. There'll probably be some sort of compromise there. Where it's like, okay, we're profit, but
yeah, they're smart. So how it works in China today, and I mean, there's many stories of this. If you were in China during 2014 to 2017, I would say, the local government would come to your farm and they'd simply say, hey, here's the deal. You haven't been paying your taxes. We know you've got this going on. We're either going to shut this down and seize all of your equipment, or you can cut us in on the deal. And we'll take like 60% of the profits and you run the farm. Because the government doesn't know what the hell to do with all of this equipment, but they understand it makes money.
Right.
So the local government has been supporting all of these operations. I can tell you right now, they do not want it to stop, but they are pressured by the central government to, put up this wall and put out these press releases and make these statements of, we don't support this. It's one of the big culture shocks when people come and do business in China, like regardless of what sector you're in, it's a huge culture shock because you start to realize what is on paper and what's happening, in front of your face isn't the deal that you're going to make under the table later. And so the CCP is very, very smart when it comes to controlling their population. They're going to do whatever makes them the most money long term and whatever, fulfills their goals long term, which right now in the blockchain sector is getting every single person onboarded onto their new platform.
I agree that the chances are small and that they would probably pursue other ways first. But as a last resort, I think they definitely could. Like, think of China's GDP is about 14 trillion right now. Mining revenue is 5 billion. That's like 0.0, less than 0.01% of their GDP is mining. And so Beijing could easily just print another 5 billion RMB a year, and the local government is walk away from this mining thing if we want to really pursue our central bank currency.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think we're kind of overestimating our importance here. It's what I mean by they don't care because we are insignificant. So
no, they don't care. Like, what can they do? Because really, if they take over a lot of, let's say they take over 70% of the hash rate with the, of the pools. So again, temporarily, they can double spend. I mean, that's what you can do when you take the hash rate. You can just double spend people. You can't do anything else. I mean, even if you could sustain having the hash rate for a long time, we know that you can't like form Bitcoin. Like, no one's gonna run CCP coin if they decide to, hard for Bitcoin, and you can't stop Schnorr or Mass because of the OESFs. I mean, but you can, you can double spend every couple of blocks, and you can disrupt Bitcoin. Like, you can make it unusable. Like, you can orphan a block out of two, and in that case, you need to develop the habit of waiting for 6 blocks. But it's kind of that's realistically like the worst thing that can happen as far as I mean,
war. If Bitcoin goes to war with the CCP like that, though, it would be great for Bitcoin.
It would.
I mean, what they could do, they can double spend like weapons deals, between like, I don't know, like North Korea and Iran. If you wanna... I mean, that's what they could do. That would be awesome. I would love to see that one day.
I could just see the Coinbase, like all the headlines. I'm entertainment. That's the only.
I would say that just because mining's only like 5 billion, don't think that's a small amount. It's not mining that they're interested in. It's the fact that people are dropping infrastructure in some of these regions that don't have great, great facilities already. And this infrastructure, while it might be custom made for Bitcoin, a data center is a data center. So there's a ton of electrical equipment that goes into building up a mining farm. And, if the mining farm disappears, great, someone can come along, buy all of that electrical equipment, repurpose it for these, AI facilities. So this is how it's done in China. They give you, they give you great grants if you position this as a blockchain technology center for AI. And so that's literally how all of the farms are. And of course, you go inside, and it's racks of ASICs. Looks nothing like a traditional data center, but it's the way they play the game over there. And so to China, to the government's, for their benefit, they're not interested in stopping this because there's no other tech stack that's consuming this kind of electricity. The tech stack is building out data centers in some of these regions that have no technology, period. And, Alibaba isn't going to go drop a data center in some of these regions, but these new startups might. And, it's in their best interest to just make sure it keeps chugging along. in terms of a currency, yeah, I don't think they have any interest in controlling the currency. I think they just want to catalog whoever's using it, keep that track, and then eventually push it over onto their new China coin. Sorry, just there's a lot of misunderstanding about how it works in China, and I have to be involved in that day to day, and I'm constantly, I'm constantly always interested in the different perspectives people have around the world about what happens in China, how the government works, how politics and how lobbying works over there, etc.
Yeah,
I lived in
it's
I lived in
helpful.
China for about 3 years. Often spent most of my time between Beijing and Shanghai, and traveled around quite a bit. And I will back up what Christy said on like kind of the two government system. There's an old saying: the emperor is powerful, but the mountains are high and the valleys are wide. It comes from a time where the power of influence around the emperor only extended so far. And so what this kind of does is what this means is in the central government in Beijing, there'll be signals like when the Congress comes together, and then she will give a big speech and say multiple times that AI, blockchain, and I don't know, some other financial technologies are going to lead new growth in the economy. And what that signals to some of the more regional governments in Xinjiang and Sichuan specifically is like, okay, this is allowed a little bit more. And then kind of like what she said, in some cases, there's arrangements made with some local representatives. So even if someone from Beijing were to send a cease and desist order to some of these local governments, they're going to turn a blind eye to it because of personal relationships and personal benefit. And the chances of a representative from Beijing coming out and reprimanding them is very slim. I mean, maybe they try to make an example of someone every now and then, but it's not really systematic in any way, shape, or form. But that being said, I don't like, unless it's a direct and immediate threat to what would be considered like cultural and social harmony, as they would put it, they don't care. They're not. I highly doubt the Beijing is concerned about Bitcoin. And then there's you have to listen to Bobby Lee, right? He said that in 2013 or 14, when he was running BTCC, it was the first Bitcoin exchange in China, that local government representatives approached him saying like, hey, the price is getting too high. We want you to put the price down, before they even really understood what Bitcoin was. I think this was in 2013. And he's like, no, that's not how it works. We don't control the price of Bitcoin. We can't just suppress it. So like, it's on their radar. Of course, they'd like to control what's in their borders. I don't think it's really a top priority for them.
So I was just gonna say that begs the question, like at what point does Bitcoin graduate from a pragmatic hedge to, in the eyes of CCP or central banking cartels, into an existential threat? Like, is this $1 trillion market
When other
cap?
countries start seriously using it. So that I guarantee you the moment when I know it won't happen, but say the US says, hey, we're doing away with the dollar. It's all Bitcoin now. That's the point where you start seeing,
Right.
nation state powers.
But it's not going to be the
play.
U.S. first. It's going to be
Yes, I
someone
know.
much smaller. Do they matter? Does someone smaller matter?
Well, Iran already announced, right? Isn't Iran mining?
Yeah. Iran supports it. They're really big on it. It's got to, in my opinion, it has to be one of these superpowers. So it has to be, it has to be one. The UK has to be the US. Canada could potentially count, but it's got to be one of these big states or enough of the smaller states.
It has to be one of the superpowers
countries.
that it benefits immensely from the existing global monetary system.
Exactly.
So who goes first?
It just, yeah. It's all about like.
Europe adopts Bitcoin.
Well, the euro's in a lot of trouble. So
it is possible. In Japan. I mean, Germany's making big strides.
I would want to throw in and kind of just like, there's a really crazy backdrop that kind of like we're not exactly hitting on, but we're talking all around of like, Bitcoin's key infrastructure being in the middle of China, which is one of the most like questionably authoritarian governments, in the modern world. There's like a beautiful kind of tension and like poetic irony in that whole thing.
Let's talk about that.
Well,
Why is the key infrastructure ASICs versus pools?
Let's just make this real quick. it's going to be supply chain. So we're talking about the only two manufacturers that matter right now are based in China, Shenzhen and Beijing. We're talking about MicroBT and Bitmain. Because of this and because of the early takeoff, mining, of course, exponentially grew relative to other regions, not for many reasons, one of which also is the delay for hardware getting to other places. And tariffs also play a huge role, especially more recently. Thirdly, under a regime that has some of the strictest monetary and capital controls in the world, if you go to someone that has a decent amount of money and say, hey, you know that renminbi that you don't want at all? Well, if you give me that renminbi, I'll give you this machine and it prints money. It prints magical internet monies. And you can then take that money and transport it to anywhere you want in the world with basically zero consequences and transfer it to USD or Euro or Yen or whatever the hell you want upon arrival in that location. Of course, it's going to be immensely popular and attractive to China at that point. I mean, there's just all signs point to it. Of course, it would be. There's the benefits
Hardware
are.
supply chains, though, have always just been China dominated because the talent is in China. You know, kids grow up and they get their first job in a factory. It's a hardware focused country. You contrast that to the US, and what is usually someone's first job in tech is software development. So software versus hardware. It just makes sense to have all the R&D talent. You know, Nvidia's top team is there, AMD's top team is there, Intel, even though a US focused company, their top team is located in China. It just makes sense. And so your supply chains are going to gravitate to wherever your R&D team is and your top talent. You combine that with, yes, like you said, the fact that it does circumvent some, some restrictions. But the location of hardware is slowly becoming more and more, decentralized. It's starting to spread out into places of the US. I'm constantly surprised how people think a majority of the infrastructure being in China is more of a threat than a majority of the infrastructure being in the US. Both are bad. Both are equally bad. We do not want, clusters of hardware anywhere. What I would then ask people, especially those of you who run pools, is let's think about the Bitcoin stack. How is having pools, majority of pools centralized, with Chinese companies and centralized in China, any less dangerous than the ASICs being in China themselves? The pools to me right now are some of the biggest threats. The pool is the one that's doing everything from mempool. The pool is the one that has, ultimate say on what goes into a block. If the pool wants to, the pool can do the censorship. It's the point of least resistance. It's harder for me as an attacker to destroy a whole mining farm. It's a lot easier to just go bribe someone at a pool or take over the pool.
Edward, do you have any thoughts about Stratum V2?
No, not at all. So this solves, I wouldn't say it solves it completely, it addresses it partially. Two aspects. It allows hash rate splitting and a bunch of backup pool options. So if China were to say, take one of the two options they have by taking those three pools in Beijing, and they would just say, shut it down, then your hash rate would hash rate. I need to get another beer. The basic computational power would automatically redirect to a backup pool or a third backup pool or a fourth backup pool of your choosing. Or you could split hash rate between numerous pools to keep yourself covered. Maybe you split 33% between three different pools. And then the second thing would be what we call job negotiation, where you choose your own block template. And if the pool rejects this negotiation, you're then welcome to take it to another pool. It's really easy to find out that a pool's rejecting it very quickly if you've submitted a block template and it doesn't go through. Stratum V2 definitely addresses this, and the kind of ethos behind it is to give miners a choice and to provide a safety net and backup plan for situations like this. The simplest way to put it is taking some of that power away from the pools and moving it back into the hands of individual miners, which may seem counterintuitive as a pool operator, but it's kind of our MO.
No, I think Stratum V2 is critical at this point. When people are theorizing about nation state attacks, they're so focused on the concentration of mining machines in one area, they don't think about the other side of the equation, which is pools. Pools, you've only got about a handful of actors really in the Bitcoin pool scene. Just go for those guys. Much easier. Shut down the infrastructure of Bitcoin that way. And Stratum V2 helps hedge a lot of that, helps take away some of the power. And then, equipment is going to congregate wherever there are supply chains, but wherever there's cheapest electricity. And so we're slowly starting to see the electricity become standardized around most regions. All depends on your lobbying power and your business negotiations. It's starting to become distributed to some degree. Supply chains, I do not see any time coming outside of China, at least until 2024, when some of the fabs start coming into the US. And it's mind-boggling to me that people point at Bitcoin and say, hey, this is a threat. Well, everything in your laptop, to the phones you use, to your entire hardware stack you're using today, it's all made in China. It's not it's always been a threat. It's always been a concern for anyone that works in the security field. My CSO used to be the ex-CSO of Micron, and he used to tell me the horror stories, that they had when they went to China, how you had to have a throwaway phone, how any phone the executives would had to use, it had to strictly be made in the US in a specific supply chain that they monitored and controlled, because that is the kind of gains that eventually happen when you're part of a very large company. So yeah, supply chains, being clustered in China, it's a world issue. I don't see that happening with being fixed anytime soon until TSMC moves and Global Foundries gets a little bit better, and until Intel starts opening their doors to more products. Samsung's pretty good. They have quite a few fabs actually globally. Their biggest one might be, still in Taiwan and Korea, but they're pretty global. You can still get some space there.
So I don't want to cut off this conversation because it's actually extremely fascinating, but we do have a lot of stuff to get through. Quick question: do we want to do bearish or bullish on hash rate derivatives? Is that something
You said hash rate?
about? Yeah, I'll drink.
Have to drink.
That would be a lot of drinking.
Also, I have to drop off, but it was fun talking to you guys. Carry on.
Cheers! Thank you for joining.
Cheers.
Kira on.
All right.
We should give Ethan a chance.
Do we want to do that, or next we can continue this conversation because I think it's fantastic, or we can go into topics, which is the first one is, are we in a bull market?
I think last word on that topic, because it might have been mislabeled. I think Stratum V2 is awesome, and everyone should check out Slush Pool and support it because the ethos is really great. But I would be pretty bearish on Chinese mining pools adopting it. I think it's not in their best interest to do so. So
there's tons of interest for the pool operator as far as like data load transfers and efficiency servers, giving their clients in remote areas. Like the benefits are limitless.
I see the benefits. I'm skeptical that the Chinese mining pools, the mega ones, will adopt it. I hope they do. And I really hope they do. But I think on the topic of China centralization, Stratum V2 is a great step in the right direction. And if we can find more incentive for Chinese pools to adopt it, that's a good thing. But
just show them how they can make money from it. Wrap it up in a business plan. The best way to get any tech stack adopted is wrap it up in a business plan. Say, here, you can sell block crafters. They can, some of the pools can do a deal with a hardware company, make tiny little Bitcoin nodes that are marketed as block crafters. People can have them in their home. The pools get a revenue split on every block crafter sold. Bingo, adoption. It's all about how do you dress it up.
Efficiency, I think, for I guess like saving money, but I don't know how it will make them directly more money. But I guess
saving money won't. But like the whole, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the key pieces of Stratum V2 is that people can delegate to have their blocks crafted, or they can have their own block templates, right?
Yeah.
Why couldn't you wrap that up, dress that up in a little node that you can run at home, and so your ASICs could pass through to that? Great market opportunity there for Canaan or Bitmain or any of the hardware manufacturers to go do a deal with the pool and say, hey, here's a new feature we can add on top of the nodes, and they push it that way, and then they get a deal of, every device that's sold at the pool gets $2 to $3 because they're supporting Stratum v2 just sitting on top of this. I mean,
I would also want to chime in, and maybe I'm looking at this through too much of a rose-colored glasses, but in the same way that your UASF kind of showed that the power was really held in node runners for the Bitcoin network and the users, doesn't Stratum v2 like automatically give power to the individual miners and the rigs themselves? Like, wouldn't it game theoretically kind of eventually end up with all of the miners? If my pool isn't implementing Stratum v2, I'm going to just switch my hash power to a pool that does.
I mean, yeah, that's definitely an option, but I want to caution people as well to not see it as like a fix-all solution, the master key to all the locked doors. The main thing is, as Ethan said, the ethos behind it, and also the fact that it offers choice. So the pool can still reject the block template you submit, but then you can, like you said, move it to another pool by default. So it allows, I guess you can kind of look at it as it allows miners to not unionize isn't the right word. It gives them bargaining power with these pools that generally are authoritarian in the fact that they decide the block templates, they decide which transactions get accelerated or not. They get to decide everything. This gives miners the choice and opportunity to basically have their own voice and get a little more power by saying, this is what we want, and if you don't accept it, then I'm going somewhere else.
So
I think one of the things that showed its benefits probably the most was the Bcash dev tax thing that was happening several months ago, where like all the pools got together and agreed that they were going to orphan the blocks that didn't participate in this program, giving 12% of the block reward to a developer's fund. So, Stratum v2 would make something like this much more difficult to actually achieve. Love the shirt, by the way, Francis. I'm going to get another beer.
All right, I'm changing the subject. I'm making the executive decision. We are going to move to our first topic. Are we in a bull market? I'm going to go to Robert on this one. Robert, are we in a bull market?
Yeah, I actually thought we entered the bull market back in April 19, based on a number of technical indicators, but clearly did not have the COVID liquidity crunch back in mid-March of this year. And as clearly, I think actually Bitcoin sort of showed its strength in that regard as being this hyper liquid asset, because in those liquidity crises, all correlations converge to one, and we saw Bitcoin, get crushed 50% overnight. That being said, if you net out that one blip, I think we've been in a bull market for a little over a year now.
David. You're muted.
Sorry, what was the question? I was like,
are we in a bull market
or so? Just as you could say, rule of thumb, I would declare a bull market if we have a weekly close above 10K. I think we're in a sideways market, a huge one, but yeah. Just to be safe.
Yeah.
Who wants to jump in?
Just to be safe.
David says sideways, Robert says bull. Anyone bear? Francis is trying to talk. You got this. Oh man, the struggle.
Oh, I'm here.
I say we're sideways.
Yes. I'm not usually on the fence, but I mean, we're not in a bear market, that's for sure, right? We're definitely in like that kind of like low bottom, kind of menisc looking pattern where we are in a bull mindset. We're preparing for a bull market, but we're not in the bull market. I mean, when we're in the bull market, like we're not gonna ask ourselves, "Are we in the bull market?" We're gonna be like
Holy
hiding.
shit, we're in the bull market.
Yeah, we're gonna be freaking the fuck out. I mean, the next bull market is gonna, it's not gonna be the last one. It's gonna be the before there's just no, not a lot of value in the other currencies. We're gonna have a big, all time high within the next 2 years. Few months. And I'm not basing this on like the stock to flow ratio or anything. I'm just basing this on just a big combination of common sense, algorithm. But we're not in a bull market. Like the flow is among the elite kind of Bitcoiners that are. I'm seeing a lot of like FOMO, like people they're cautiously buying. People are all kind of winking like buying the bottom right now. Um, the next we're gonna be in a bull market when I don't want to be too descriptive, but it's gonna be fucking nuts and crazy in all sorts of ways. And this is not it. This is not crazy at all. This is kind
It
of
might
boring.
might help to define a bull market a little bit. Like if I'm expecting a new all-time high price in any market within 2 years, I classify that as a bull market. So
Who has a different
I
definition?
think we're at the bottom. I think it's at the bottom. I think it's like a historic bottom. I think like people are gonna be bragging about how they bought the 8 grand, the 8K. Let's say the 6K
I guess
more like
I really get to brag then.
Yeah. I mean, if you bought the 6K, like this, you're a legend. Like if you bought between 6 and 6,500, like kudos. You're gonna look cool on Twitter in like 5 years with that.
I like the sound of that. What's next for mining? Scott, what's next for mining?
Yeah, what's next for mining? Well, we were kind of talking about it earlier, with the whole geopolitical stuff going on there. I mean, personally, I'd like to see mining come even more so to North America and to other countries. As Christy was saying, there's a lot of talent in China from a chip manufacturer, ASIC manufacturer point of view. I mean, I know there's a few companies right now working on stuff like this, but I think more ASIC manufacturers, companies being created around the world would be really great to see. I really think, just personally, I mean, mining is just getting more institutional. I'm sure all of you guys can attest to that. It's harder for the small miners, the hobby miners, to compete these days. And really, I think that we're just going to see a lot more of that. Just larger farms, even governments participating in mining.
Real quick, just want to give a shout out to, looks like, who will be giving us the thumbs up and making sure everyone washes their hands. So make sure you wash your hands.
Thanks, Hobie. Who wants to chime in on what's next for mining?
I think an interesting part is that, like, historically, the West has dominated with quantitative funds versus the East with mining. And I think it was Matt from Sound Capital that's really hammered to this point in consensus. But I think as we develop more sophisticated profit switching algorithms, you'll start to see that change. So historically, mining pools have been somewhat of a commoditized business. Not too much differentiation from one platform to another. I think as more quantitative factors get put into mining pools, it'll start to really differentiate them. So I think the days of China dominating the mining pool industry, 95% roughly, versus only 65% production, I think that'll start to shift, and we'll see a lot more pools outside of China start to take hold. So that'll probably start with a shift from outside of China. So something to like mining pools in China will only control about 65%, or roughly the same as the production of hash rate. So I'm excited to see that happen. I think it's it's definitely coming in the next 2 or 3 years.
Where do you think it'll happen, out of curiosity? Because it seems like all the new pools popping up are just agent pools or proxy pools of the top 5.
Yeah, so mining pools are a tough business to run, as you know. You need a lot of liquidity to fund pay per share methods. So really, I guess it depends on your risk tolerance, but at minimum, you need about 15 to 20 blocks worth of Bitcoin to do that. So
generally, about 1,000 BTC is advised if you want to get into it.
I mean, it depends how risk averse you are.
Yeah.
Like, if you follow like mining probabilistic luck as the Erlang distribution, I think if you're in the realm of 15, it's the minimum for sure. But obviously, like 1,000 BTC would be nice to make sure that you're not going to go bankrupt your pool. But regardless, it's large capital requirements, so it's hard for new entrants to enter the space. So I think it's going to be like, for the Bitcoin space specifically, it has to be an existing large player in the Bitcoin ecosystem, an exchange, or maybe a large mining farm, or a large player that wants to get into mining. So I think it's coming.
Or a hardware provider.
Or yeah, but then it's another Chinese mining pool.
Speaking of your point, by the way, we had Nick Hansen write in talking about Binance launching their pool. Do you have any comments on that?
Nick.
Ed, I'll let you comment.
I mean, I think everyone has I haven't heard really that many different opinions on Binance Pool, right? The main points are they're expanding vertically into a bunch of stuff very quickly, acquiring a bunch of new companies. Their cold storage wallet has 89,000 BTC, maybe 90,000 BTC now, so they have plenty of reserves to operate a PPS pool, PPS Plus pool, FPPS at a loss for however long they want to until they acquire enough hash rate, which is essentially what they've been doing the last 2 months. Just like the other exchanges, it's nothing new. Huobi and OKX have already gone through this before. It can be like a loss-leading business into some of their other avenues of income, various exchange services. There's ways you can attract it besides doing like dirt cheap or negative fees. You can create a token like Huobi pool token and subsidize rewards with that. And that works for about half a year to maybe a year before the token becomes completely illiquid. And if any of the mining whales try to sell it, it'll just dump the price into oblivion. Right, like there's no real new value proposition from Binance. It's like, hey, come with us, you'll get a PPS pool and it'll be dirt cheap. As we've seen, right before they came out, I said, oh, it's probably just going to target exchange hash rate primarily and target Chinese hash rate primarily because of where their connections are and where they've been traditionally based. That's essentially been the case. Besides new hash rate, it seems like they've taken most of their hash rate from Huobi and OKX. As far as I know, none of ours has gone over there. Yeah, and then I've noticed they're hiring a bunch of international people now, so they'll start going for more global hash rate share. Hash rate, sorry.
They took some of, I saw they took some of Antpool's executives and some of the executives from basically Bitmain's big pool. Folks jump around the pool ecosystem all the time, but I thought that was interesting because these people already have, rich connections with the various farms, so they know exactly where to go to.
Everyone's putting a lot of pressure outside of China, though. So what I've heard from people I know that work at Chinese mining pools is you see a bunch of people like F2 and Poolin setting up offices in Europe and virtual offices in North America because it's gotten to kind of like a standstill. They all know each other's clients. They can talk to them all day long, but the relationships are so entrenched at this point that someone from F2 Pool, even if they offer them better rates, will not get a certain client from Ant Pool to come over to them. Yeah. So they're looking, and they all are in a general consensus that hash rate will move outside of China over the next 5 years towards cheaper electricity. So they're getting kind of poised for that and hoping to capture as much hash rate outside of China as possible. everyone, I mean, right, you see everyone's hash rate's pretty stagnant or
Hash rate.
grow as hash rate as new ASICs get released and shipped to data centers, and they all rise in unison when wet season starts because everyone's flipping on new machines. But it's not. They're really struggling to capture each other's market share at this point. So
I really like how Ethan has said it in the past. I can't remember if that was on my podcast or if that was offline. You know, how you said, you know, instead of looking at it where the pool is taking a 2% fee, you can look at it as though the pool is buying your hash rate at 98%, right? I can't remember exactly how you said it, but that was always very interesting to think about it in that way.
Yeah, it's often not as talked about, but there is a marketplace for hash rate today. It's just very much so OTC, where you have to go one-on-one negotiate with a mining pool and negotiate a fee, and that sets your price. And that's really the value of hash rate today is about 98% of what it would be worth, the expected value of mining Bitcoin with it, because that's the value that it changes hands between a miner and a mining pool. So that's I think the more practical way to look at like pools that operate on PPS. Obviously, Edge pool is probably the notable exception that doesn't really work that way. But I think around 95% of the network now operates on a PPS method where they pay you upfront for the expected value of your hash rate. And it's really, we're just purchasing your hash rate for 98% of what we think we can make from it. So that really plays into like profit switching too, is like, if we can profit switch, we can up the amount that our expected value is, and we can now start buying hash rate at a higher price. And so you as a miner obviously want to sell your hash rate higher. So us internally upping that expected value is a good thing.
Hey Ethan, when nice hash clone?
Soon.
Thank God.
All right, guys. So Robert needs to bounce pretty soon. I think there's a good place to transition into our last topic. What fourth epoch narratives are going to drive Bitcoin forward? I'm going to let Robert answer this question and then kind of give his last word and then bounce. And then the rest of y'all can jump in. But Robert, you want to talk about what narratives you think drive Bitcoin in this next 4-year period?
Yeah, I think our, as a lot of Bitcoiners now refer to him, our boy Paul Tudor Jones, who came out recently and said he's putting a single-digit percentage of his fund in Bitcoin. He defines the era that we're going into as the great monetary inflation, and I think that, you know, that's a narrative that makes a lot of sense. So we've never seen this rate of expansionary monetary policy simultaneously worldwide ever. So I think that that narrative makes sense. You know, more dollars chasing less Bitcoin. So I think people are going to wake up to that. It's just a straight inflation hedge.
Cool. Any last words for the audience and for the group?
No, this is very insightful. Thanks, guys. You know, please feel free to reach out to me. We're trying to figure out sort of where the puck is going in Bitcoin mining, and looking to make direct investments in and around the space. So always, I'm forever a student of the markets and Bitcoin mining. So anytime you want to talk about it, please let me know. And thanks again for having me.
Thanks for coming, Robert. Always great to have
Cheers,
you.
man.
And yeah, have a good night.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
All right,
Cheers, Robert.
Who wants to take over this topic? Francis, I feel like you're itching for it.
Let me give some context too. You know, if we want to talk about what the narratives were last time, you know, we had the fork wars, we had SegWit, we had Lightning getting really implemented, we even had Liquid getting implemented. You know, so much stuff. ICOs were like a whole craze. There are so many different threads that were kind of part of this last epoch. So from that same lens, like, what do we expect this next one to look like? Like, what are the narratives? What are the different threads?
I think the most important one, at least for me, whenever you're trying to analyze, I've been I've been involved in the space pretty much as a trader analyst, um, for the most part. I think you're going to include macro much more. Um, for the most part, until last year, you could forego a lot of the macroeconomical stuff, and how it affects the price and several other metrics of Bitcoin. I think coming off from last year and even more so after coronavirus and this last halving, I think the macro narrative is going to be much more important for just analyzing the market in general. Um, I mean, miners and other types of components and roles in the industry for sure at a much more fundamental perspective, as opposed to just focusing on price all day. Um, I think for the first time, Bitcoin is much more interlinked with the rest of the world. So both the causes and effects are going to be much less localized and have much more significance in the goings on in terms of big players getting into the space like Paul Tudor Jones, much more interest from regulators, um, much more incentives to participate in the industry in one way, shape, or form, and also macroeconomic narratives having a much larger influence on price in general. I think you're going to pick up temporary correlations with other assets much more often. Not sure at all how that's going to play out as of now. But yeah, I think it's pretty much going macro going forward.
Who's next? We want your 2 sats here.
I'll go. The main like marketing narrative for the next epoch is going to be the money printing narrative. So I think Bitcoin is not going to be advertised so much as a payment system or as a resistant system. I mean, that's kind of like the phases, right? You had the first one was like the fast free payments, and then you had the censorship resistant, sound money, decentralized network, governments can't hack it. I think the number three. Are we the third epoch or the fourth epoch? Fourth epoch, yeah. So I guess
Fourth epoch.
Number four is going to be definitely just number go up, right? So for the everything else is becoming more expensive in dollar terms, and if you hold Bitcoin, everything is becoming cheaper. I think the normie narrative is going to be definitely just how do I buy this thing. It used to be, what about the drugs? What about this? What about that? The altcoins. Isn't blockchain technology the killer app? All sorts of questions. I think the one question on people's minds is going to be how do I buy this thing and make sure no one takes it away from me. The from a technology perspective, yeah, we had previous the last epoch was all about SegWit, Lightning, Liquid, CoinJoin, all these major technological advancements like those four. There's nothing really that exciting, to be honest. Like the whole running your stream. I think the Bitcoin community is going to be a lot more axed around like political resistance and political movements now. I think Bitcoin has scaled socially in a sense where the Bitcoin community of builders is kind of like there's no like huge governance issue or there's no like community issue at this point. Bitcoin is kind of entering that phase where it's a fait accompli. It's an established. Bitcoin's not like no one is really doubting the trajectory Bitcoin is on. I think everybody has a good sense of where this thing is heading, and now it's just about you know either either from the normie side, like how do I buy this thing because I want the price to I want to protect my savings, and because the it's not gonna happen in the US. The USD is not gonna have this mega like inflationary spiral, but other currencies will. Canada will, Australia will for sure, and a bunch of other ones. Yeah, so now we get to enjoy Bitcoin and use it. I think that's like the thing. The next halving is just let's just use Bitcoin's kind of ready for prime time. Scalability wise, it's not that there's a lot of work to do, but the thing kind of sells itself now, and it's just ready to use it to create some chaos and light some fires and make it happen.
Christy.
Yes, I guess the narrative that I believe that's going to come into play is fees. So I think that I'm a big fan of Hasu's research and reports. I know that a lot of the companies we represent have been closely looking at alternative ways to monetize ASIC devices, and I think that the block subsidy is one part of the equation. I think people are going to start looking into fees, and I think between now and the next epoch, there's going to be a host of applications that are trying to figure out how do we increase the fee market? How do we, how do we ensure that there's a replacement to the missing block subsidy? I think people are going to pay attention and start thinking now about what happens when the lost Bitcoin is mined, even though it's well after our lifetime. People are starting to pay attention to that even now in some of the spaces. So I think that's all going to happen, and I think we are going to see some more unusual players enter Bitcoin. So not your traditional investors. We're going to see component suppliers enter Bitcoin. We're going to see mobile phone companies enter into Bitcoin. We're going to see, network providers, some, a whole host of services start either contributing, accepting, or building on the infrastructure, because Bitcoin has reached a place where it's going out, at least from what I'm seeing, it's going from, hey, this is some little cool experiment by a bunch of it's on the internet, to holy shit, this has 10 years of history behind it. It's actually something. So at least that's what I'm seeing. I feel it's still a little too early to figure out what the narrative is going to be, in the next epoch, but that's at least what I'm seeing in my little corner of the world.
Not sure who we just lost right there, but Scott, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I had to Google what the word epoch meant, so I didn't really prepare anything to say.
Next 4 years. The next 4 years.
Yeah, man, just more Bitcoin. I think it's going to be a wild ride. Drop the mic.
Let's go. All right. Ethan, do you have any thoughts here?
I think people covered it pretty well. Bitcoin, to me, is a financial revolution and was born out of the financial crisis. So I think as the economy changes, the Fed keeps printing money, that value prop is going to really resonate with people. And again, people covered it well so far. So I'm pretty bullish over the next 4 years. In Canada specifically, I think a lot of people are going to look to it. Canadian dollar is getting pretty weak compared to the USD. So in terms of a hedge, as a replacement for gold, I think it's going to become quite valuable for Canadian investors. So looking forward to more people in my country starting to adopt it as an asset class in their portfolio.
So
that's my take on Bitcoin, but I think pretty bullish on North American mining in the next 4 years. I think there's going to be a large path towards more hash rate here. So that's what I'll be actively working on and supporting.
Absolutely.
In regards to I guess yeah. Fuck. I totally blanked on what I was about to say, but we'll just move on here. We can move over to last word. I think it's time to close it out anyways. Last word is really where you can kind of give your final thoughts. If you have any analysis about the past 2 weeks, post-halving talk that you didn't get to, this would be a great time to shill it, as well as shill where people can find you and who you want to hear from. So let's start with David. David, what's your last word? You're muted. You're muted.
You're muted, David.
Oh, sorry again.
No worries.
Regarding the comment on China about when either China or any other powerful nation state might attack the network, at which time or which price would that happen? I think it's all relative to the amount of supply China has by then as well. If they have a way to control at least the liquidity of it, I think they're just going to keep pumping it. So just on that. Apart from that, ideologically bullish on Bitcoin, sideways on a technical matter until we breach 10K. You can find me on Twitter and Medium at Kenosha King, which is Kenosha King, not Kino Shaking, but it's the same, whatever. And that's it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man. Scott.
Yeah, not much else to say. I think this is a really brilliant conversation with a bunch of brilliant minds. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter or Telegram at Offered Scott, as you can see in my background. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cool. Christy.
Final words. I'm trying to debate whether I say something controversial or not.
Do it.
My final thoughts are, I think,
It better be controversial.
It will be very controversial. All the next generation ASICs that are being developed in the U.S. So, your non-micro BT, your non-Bitmain, your non-eBang, which yes, I know they're not great, but even so, I think they're all going to be subpar performance. I think they're barely going to lag behind 1 or 2 generations of what Bitmain is doing. And so I think people should plan accordingly around that. I think we're going to see a host of new equipment come out from some bigger players that aren't even in the Bitcoin space at all, but are simply, developing it because the demand is there and they want a steady supply that is outside of China. So those are my thoughts and my opinions based upon what I'm seeing. Last time I said that, I got a lot of hate from some of the people that are building US equipment, but I hope that I am pleasantly surprised. And yeah, if people want to ever talk mining or algorithms or just chat in general, find me on Twitter at @GoGotAGirl.
All right. Awesome. Ethan, jump in here, man.
I think the biggest trends I'm curious to see, and I think that will take the mining market by storm, is financialization of hash rate. So we saw the first entrant with FTX hash like difficulty-based futures. Really excited to start trading those. I think this is going to be a really interesting asset class for investors to trade with. It's a topic I spend a lot of time on, the financialization of hash rate and derivatives. So you can find me on Twitter at Ethan_Vera. Always happy to talk, those derivatives. And thanks for having me on, CK.
Yeah, man. Of course. And then finally, let's close out with Edward. Thanks for staying up late over in Europe.
Yeah, it's about, was it 3:08 a.m. over here right now? Wow. First off, just, thanks for having me on. Secondly, it was a pleasure speaking with all of you. Christy, Ethan, Scott, David, and of course our fallen brethren, Robert, Kiara, and I feel like I'm forgetting someone. Francis, that's right. It was a real pleasure to hear everyone's thoughts and opinions on the various topics. Lastly, I guess to answer your question, just as a sign-off message, go check out what we're doing in terms of open source mining protocol and firmware for machines, similar to the kind of not your keys, not your Bitcoin approach that Andreas Antonopoulos has really popularized. we're taking a similar approach to hardware, saying, not your firmware, not your miner. There's tons of fiascos that have happened in the past, whether it be amp lead or covert ASIC boost or some other more recent ones that I won't name. We have S17 model support coming out very, 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 very soon. Can't say a specific date for that though. They'll get mad at me. After that will be M20 series. And anything else? Yeah, just go check us out. Support your mining pools outside of China to combat some of that centralization we were talking about. And if you ever want to send me a DM or anything and talk about mining, I'm always happy to chat about it. And even better if you can come to Prague and have a beer.
Let's go. All right, guys, this is a great conversation. Honestly, one of my favorites. So thanks for making a great panel. You guys, hit subscribe on Bitcoin Magazine YouTube. Hit follow on Bitcoin Magazine Twitter. We're going to keep these shows coming, so hopefully we can keep having great panels like this. Thanks for watching. I'm CK. Down to the right is Brandon, at BrandBTC. Follow everyone. Let's go. Peace.
A digital currency in which transactions can
Cool,
be
y'all.
performed
Well, that was a good show. Thanks for hopping on.
All right, Jared, we come to you.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers for having us, man.
Peace. Enjoy your Thursday and happy Friday, Ed.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody.
Nice.
Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, nice catching up, David.
Yeah, for sure.
Bye, Christy.
Have a good one, man.
In 350 BCE, Aristotle defined sound money as being durable, transferable, divisible, scarce, recognizable, and fungible. Sound money. I mean, I know what cryptocurrency is. Why don't you tell me what you know about Bitcoin as a jumping off point? Okay, sure.
Yo, check it. Hey, yo, fuck cash currently. Cuddies pay me in cryptocurrency. For the crystals that I cut with the cutlery. Anonymous, don't have to meet plugs on the corner now. Press enter on the keyboard. I send your order out. 100 miles an hour as we cruise down the Silk Road. Blowing OG out the whip, trying to pull holes. I dream of empires, trying to stack guap like niggas who work on Wall Street. So I'm chasing buyers. Log in, there's plenty of users and consumers getting higher rich off of their computer. Ain't nothing new, this info wait for everybody, yo. Use it to your advantage to take over your body, yo. Magic mushrooms, I had them eating them like Mario. Blockchain heavy, got it clicking with the Molly flow. And niggas gotta know.